a case brief can have uh, two distinct meanings. One is a brief that you prepare about a case which you are appearing in or acting on. Another is a case brief where you effectively summarize or try to explain decided cases. I will concentrate on the first kind of case brief and hopefully also cover a little bit of the second because that is something I like to do myself and I find um, is also helpful generally in practice. Now, there is a lot said about lawyers being officers of the court, etc., etc., and that lawyers ought not to take uh, their matters or their clients' matters personally. But I've discovered right since I was in college and I mooted that you don't get the hold of a case properly unless and until you look at it from the point of view of your client. Because when you look at a case from the point of view of your client, you realize how your client reads a document. For example, how your client reads or understands a contract, how your client interprets it. In many cases, in most cases, lawyers and clients are not lawyers themselves, but it is they who enter into the transactions which lead to cases. And by transactions, I mean not just contracts, but even the writing of letters, holding of meetings. Ultimately, all of these become facts in a case. And you will notice as you practice that even if the fact is one, there are diametrically opposite views of those facts on both sides. And that happens because it's important for one lawyer to be able to read the facts as his client would, to try and understand what the client was thinking when those facts occurred. And the reason I'm starting with this before getting into what a case brief is you will realize in litigation, especially, a case involves a mass of papers, okay? Plaints, written statements, affidavits, replies, rejoinders, surrejoinders. The ideal task of a case brief is to be able to cut through the noise of all this paper and to try and boil down a case to its essence so that you can put it across to a judge who is A, pressed for time, B, uh, has too many other things which are also taking up his attention, C, sees cases like yours a dime a dozen, and therefore may not necessarily be interested till you get the person interested in the case. And it's human nature that the, the larger the size of the matter, the more there is a tendency to delay it, or the more diffidence that one comes to it with. Therefore, the easier you can make your matter appear, or the shorter or quicker you can make your matter appear, that much more attention and interest is likely to be generated in a judge. And ultimately, in litigation, your primary task is to be able to get a judge interested in your case It is when he gets interested in your case, when he understands your case, that he becomes more inclined to A, hear you, and perhaps more inclined to grant you relief. Now, a case brief usually starts without any writing. It starts with a thorough, and I cannot emphasize more how much I mean that word thorough reading of the papers in your case. A lot of people ask me when they see me work with papers and briefs, they say, do you have to read all of that? And what I've realized is, no, you don't need to read all of that all the time, but it is absolutely essential for you to have read all of it at least once, because you never know what you will find, where you will find it in that mass of papers. And so it's not uh, the first task when you get any brief, whether it is to prepare a case to go to court or a brief of matters which are already in court. Your first task is to read that brief inside out, right side, left, as thoroughly as possible. It's only when you read that brief as thoroughly that you get even a faint idea of all the issues which arise in the case. And it's only when you realize all the issues which arise in the case that you can ultimately decipher which are the issues worth being concentrated on, which are the issues you would much rather avoid, which are the issues to be highlighted, which are the issues to be put on the back seat. All of that can only happen if you have a thorough knowledge of what your brief is. So nothing starts without having read your papers or your brief inside out. The next important thing which you must decipher before you start preparing a brief is cases are of different kinds. Okay. Uh, and I'm not just saying in terms of a suit or an arbitration or a writ petition, etc. Even within a case, there are various stages. And when there are various stages, it's important to realize how to approach and prepare a case brief for each stage. The most regular thing that you will end up doing is to argue a matter or to assist in a matter for interim relief, because trials happen, but it's rare that you get to finally argue a suit once or twice in your career, maybe at least in the first 10-15 years. So let's start with how you approach making a case brief for a matter where you are seeking, say, interim relief. Now, interim relief in a case is actually in 9 out of 10 cases, I would say the most critical stage of any proceeding. Because in most cases, that is what you're fighting for. To be able to get some order or relief which pushes the other side to come to the table to capitulate. Many cases are not really filed with the idea of getting a decree at the end of the day. Most litigation is filed only in order to sort of force the matter and to try and get the other side to the bargaining table. So such matters are usually heard quickly, reasonably quickly. A judge is not always inclined to give it the kind of time that he may give a trial, and therefore the importance of presenting your case as briefly and as succinctly as you can. Now, the way I go about preparing my case briefs is when papers come in, if it is if you are drafting an original thing, then there's no question of a case brief yet. A case brief will only come into play once a matter is filed and it has to be argued. So in preparing a case brief, like I said, step one, thorough inside out reading of every single line in the brief that you have been given. Second step is to then, once you have read all the papers inside out, you get a general idea of what are the important matters in the, what are the important or prominent questions or issues which are likely to arise. So you then go back and read your brief a second time, but not necessarily end to end. You emphasize on the parts of the brief which you thought are important. This second reading is important because many a times when you read a document, your first reading of that document may give you X meaning. This happens even with reading statutes, reading sections and subsections. Your first impression of a legal provision or of a document can be miles apart from what your impression will be on your second or your third reading. And that's why it's important perhaps to read your brief more than once. First, a full reading. Next, a reading just to highlight in your mind what are the important parts. The third step is to prepare a chronology. It's incredible, but it's only when you prepare a chronology, and a chronology which sticks to really, you know, 1st January 1st, 2nd January 2nd, not something like, not a jumble. It's only when you arrange your facts in a chronological order, even if they have no direct relation to each other. It's only when you arrange your facts in chronological order that you actually get a picture of how your matter has proceeded from day one. How how, say for example, if it's a contract case, how the contract came into place, why did parties agree on certain things, why did they agree on those things in certain words. A lot of this has to do with what happens not just on the day that they sign on the dotted line, but also on the days before and after. So a chronological examination of your facts is absolutely essential. So step one in any case brief is to prepare a chronology of facts of your case. However insignificant, at least first, at your first go, you must list down that chronology. Now, how do you prepare that chronology? I prefer in a matter not to use my own words. See, when you are ultimately, you are preparing all of this with the point of view that you have to explain this to a judge who has no background in the case. You also have to explain it to him without having to take him through 500 pages. You also need him to build a certain amount of confidence in what you are saying. And initially, that confidence happens if you tell the judge not your gloss of a case, but what the words of the documents in that case actually say. So, for instance, if date one is January 1, 2021, and if on that date a letter has been written, you have to be able to read that letter, read it a second time so that you understand, like I said, first only to get familiar with that document. Second, to get familiar with what its important features are, what its important points are. And therefore, third, when you come to actually putting that document or introducing that document in your case brief, to be able to pick out language from that document and putting it there within quotes. So there are two advantages to this. One advantage is that you give anybody reading the document the confidence that they are not reading a lawyer's gloss on that letter or say on an order. They are reading the actual words of that document. Second, they know that if they are reading the actual words of that document, they don't need to make an assessment of whether the lawyer is trustworthy or not, because the lawyer is telling them, look, these are not my words, these are the words of the document. It's not even really a question of trust, it's a question of how objective you can make yourself. And as a lawyer, I don't think you can make yourself more objective than saying, when I speak not my own words, I speak what the document says. So when you are preparing your case brief and in that you are recounting your facts, it will be important to incorporate as much as possible the language of the facts which you are reciting. Sometimes that will not be possible. Sometimes, uh, as you will see, especially with letters which lawyers write, uh, they have very, I shouldn't say they, we have a very difficult time stopping. And we have a very difficult time knowing when enough is enough. So there are some documents which are so lengthy and prolix that sometimes you will have to give your own shortened version of it. But till then, till such time that a document is, you can easily capture language of a document itself, you should try and stick as much as possible to that language. After you have prepared your chronology, you go over that chronology exactly as you went over the facts. I usually, when I start making my chronology, I, in the first instance, if my first draft of that chronology is, say, about 10 pages, my second draft, I try and bring down to about 60 to 70% of what I started with, which is the process in which you start editing yourself. And I can't tell you how important it is to be able to do that task, to be able to edit yourself. Just as we find it difficult to know when enough is enough, we have to know when we have said too much. But that can only happen once you have said more than you should, and then you go back, you realize which are the places you have said more than you should, and then you start cutting. Once you go over the list a second time, you then realize, okay, these are these are all the facts. This is now on my second reading, I have reduced them to the shortest version of them. Now let me see how many of them are absolutely necessary to be included in that list, and how many of them I can keep aside. So let me just give you an example of what I am saying. Okay, usually my list of dates or my chronology starts like this. I first give a many a times, you want to make, sometimes making a thing or a submission short, it's essential to start making abbreviations. And it's helpful if you give the reader advance notice of what those abbreviations are. So I usually start by giving at least the important abbreviations right at the top in the form of a key. Then I go to the facts. Now, this was a case which, as you can see, has a history going back to 1921, and the suit was filed in 2017. Okay, so there are facts going back almost a century, and which means that it is absolutely essential for you to make out what is necessary and what is unnecessary. So what I have done here is, like I said to you, go chronologically, but also color code things so that you know what is what. For instance, in this chronology, whatever is marked in blue is, there is no dispute about any of it. Whatever is in black are the issues on which there were factual disputes. And as we will go down, you will see whatever is red are the areas where the most serious controversy lies, both in terms of facts and in terms of law. Now, the reason I have prepared this in the way that I have is because this was a suit. It related to property which had a long history before it came to its owner. That history had to be recounted, but at the same time not made too long. So, for instance, I remember, if you see this line, suit property belonged to Diwan's grandfather, great grandfather. The reason I put it, I'm just trying to give you an example of what I mean when you say your first reading, then your second reading, try to shorten things. This one sentence came from a document which described the suit property in about 15 lines. Okay, 15 individual sentences. So and so was so and so, so and so was so and so, so and so was so and so's son, so and so was so and so's grandson, great grandson, etc., etc., etc. But what you have to understand is what is important is who was the original owner. So from those 15 sentences, it's only when you have read those 15 sentences, then reread them to see which of the 15 are really important, then perhaps gone back and realized, okay, even from say if out of 15, 10 sentences are important or 7 are important, what is most critical in all of that, which ultimately brings us to a single sentence of seven seven words. But this is all when you have read the 7,000 before and then realize that these are the 7 which need to be in. So a case brief also, like I said, is for the court's convenience, and many a times it will also be for the convenience of the person who is actually arguing. As a lawyer, as a young lawyer, you will realize that at least initially, you are not going to be the one arguing a matter. You are going to be assisting somebody, and that somebody is going to again, A, have too many matters on any given day, B, have done things like this day in, day out, so is far too familiar with it, and C, otherwise simply does not have the time. So a case brief is also important in order to brief somebody. So if you see this, this list of dates has 6 columns, okay? And I can't emphasize the importance of these columns more. Serial number is critical because when you are arguing before a court, it's important to be able to pinpoint the judge to what you are talking about. And the serial number is the easiest way to identify it. It's the quickest. The second column must be the date, because before you know what happens, you have to know when it has happened. The third column will be what is the event that you are describing. An event can be a simple factual event like a property belonged to somebody, or an event can be the description of a transaction entered into on that day, as we'll come later. The next column which I keep and which I find most helpful is a cross-referencing. Because when a judge ultimately has to decide a case, he has to go by what is stated in the pleadings, in the plaint, in the written statement, in the affidavit, etc. It's important to let the judge know that, okay, I am getting this shorthand version of this case from this lawyer, but if I want to see the long form, I don't have to go through the hundreds of pages. The lawyer has given me a reference to exactly where I need to look if I have to confirm what he is saying. So if the judge in my case has to confirm that suit property belonged to D1's great grandfather, he only has to go to the reply. I have given the para and I have given the page number. Now, the last 2 columns ignore for a while, because that is particular to this matter. Why this matter was the reason I have given title to suit property is because the question in the case was, when the transaction in dispute arose, who was the person who owned the property? And that is why it was important to always keep in the judge's mind who was the person at the relevant time who had title to the property. That's the only reason I have kept that column. Normally, my case briefs will have these 4 columns. Okay. Now, let me give you an instance of what I meant to say. You have to copy or incorporate as much of the language of a document as possible. Uh, if you see entry 8, okay, we've now come to the red part because this was the most critical part of the case, this document. You describe what the document is, you describe who the parties to the document are, and then instead of copy pasting the entire document, you reproduce that part of it which is important. And when you reproduce it, within what you have reproduced, if there is some language that you want to emphasize, put it in bold, maybe underline it, however you prefer. What I usually prefer to do is, when I am reproducing something, I will try and highlight or make bold what I want to emphasize in that document. And then when I am saying something, if I am making a lawyer's comment on that document, then I use underlining. So for instance, I wanted to emphasize that the property which was being spoken of in this document did not form part of what was claimed to be the suit property in that case. So I reproduce the clause and then I note that this was not a part of the suit property. This not and the underlining tells the judge, okay, what is important here is the word not. So what I have to highlight in my mind when I am deciding this case is that word not. These are all tricks to get a judge to know exactly what that judge needs to focus on. Now, this is an example of a case brief where it's the first stage of a matter. A suit has been freshly filed. It's the first time a judge is going to hear about it. Because it's a suit, it's largely concerned with questions of fact. What does a particular document say? What event occurred on a particular date? For that sort of a case, it's this sort of a case brief, which can be long. Now, if you see the entire record in this case ran into about, I think, about 1700 pages. Okay. But I have tried to encapsulate everything in 30. That only happens if you know exactly what you want to show the judge and exactly what you would rather the judge not see or not emphasize. Don't hide anything from the judge, but if you are a lawyer for a party, it's equally important for you to know what you would rather the judge not see. Now, let me give you an example of a different type of case. Say uh, you are appearing in a matter under the IBC. It's a quick matter. You have to be the judges in the tribunal are even more overworked than uh, in the High Court, for instance. You have to get across your point straightforward and quickly. In which case, I start using short forms as much as possible. So now let me share with you something which I found is helpful when I go before the NCLT. Okay, this was a case where I was for the respondent, and my entire task was to show that the claim was barred by limitation. Now, in the NCLT or in any tribunal, you have very little time. So it's just as important to, it becomes even more important to be able to compress your case. This case had a record of perhaps, if I remember correctly, maybe about 200 to 250 pages. And from there, you have come down to 5. The reason you came down to 5 is you don't want the judge, you don't want the judge to feel overwhelmed by the case. When a judge sees 250 pages of pleadings and affidavits, and he sees 5 pages of a note, he's definitely going to be more interested in going to the 5 pages. Second, this was, unlike the first case I showed you, not so much concerned with exactly what a document said, but the fact that that document was sent at all. For instance, let me give you an example. Let me try to explain what I mean. The petitioner here had placed purchase orders on my client. Sorry, I had placed purchase orders on the petitioner. So I had to pay the petitioner within a certain amount of time. The period of limitation is 3 years, right? This was clearly a matter, the matter was filed in 2019 and supplies were effected in July of 2013. Which means, as you can see, there were 6 years. The person had waited to come to court 6 years late. Which means what was important for me to highlight to the court was not this was the purchase order, this is what the purchase order said, this is what, so this is the language of the purchase order. That may have been important in the first case, but not here. Here, I have to be able to make the judge concentrate on the dates on which events happen. That is why these entries, if you see, unlike the entries in my first state, are extremely short. I don't uh, I don't say, for instance, if you see respondent placed purchase orders. Now, I don't go into what the purchase orders said. The second entry is supply. So the first, in a case like this, you call it a case for goods sold and delivered. What is important? That somebody ordered goods, entry 1. Next, somebody supplied goods, entry 2. 3, now these events are very specific to the facts. So ignore 3, 4, and 5. Next important thing, were the goods submitted or supplied in time? So that's 4. 5, what happened after the supply happened? Did I make payment? Did I not make payment? 6, what was the last date on which I had to make payment and the date on which the litigation commenced? Because in this case, my last payment to the seller was in September of 2013. 3 years of limitation. The petition is filed in 2019. So the judge only needs to see these dates. This is not as important. This third column is not as important as it was in the first. Another thing was that in that case, the petitioner had kept from the court a lot of important documents. So it's important to emphasize, and judges and courts, tribunals take suppression of facts extremely seriously. So it's absolutely important for a judge who comes to the case to know first and foremost that something has been hidden from him. As a lawyer, if you can make that out, you get huge brownie points. And that is important. So if you see a lot of the documents which showed that a payment was made more than 3 years ago, that thereafter there was nothing, no payment made, not even an acknowledgement of liability. There were documents to show that. Those documents had been kept back by the petitioner. So as me, as the respondent, my task was important. My critical task was to bring to the judge's attention not what each document said, but the critical fact was the fact that the document was suppressed. So when you are preparing a list of dates, once you have read all the papers, you also realize, like I said, it's only when you read things more than once that you realize what is important in this case. And it's only when I read this matter 2 or 3 times that I realized that what is really critical in this case is to be able to show to the court that this is somebody who has come to you unfairly without giving you the full picture. Now, another kind of case would be where you are making an argument. So these two were examples of litigation which was at the first stage. Okay. The next stage is where litigation goes up, say in appeal. Now, under ideal circumstances, litigation should work like a triangle. At the first level, everything in the case is open. All the facts are open for dispute and decision. the principles of law are open for dispute and decision. As you, if your case is something which is going to, keep going higher, as you go each step above, the facts will lose their significance and the law will take over. So let me give you an example of a case which went now before the Supreme Court. Now, let me just give you what the facts in the case were briefly so that you understand why the case brief is prepared in the manner in which it is. I was for the plaintiff. My case was that the defendant had defrauded me and kept facts from me, and by that fraud had kept me out of a lot of money. According to me, the fraud happened in the year 2000. My suit was filed in the year 2008. Now, the law is where you are trying to get some actions voided on the ground that there is fraud, you have to file the suit within 3 years from the date on which you discovered the fraud. There was a provision so that's limitation, right? The limitation for the suit was 3 years. There was a provision in our civil procedure code which said that in any suit, if you make an application for interim relief and the defendant raises an objection to the jurisdiction of the court to entertain the suit, that objection has to be decided first and foremost before considering whether you should get an injunction or not. Now, limitation is usually a question of fact, because it's a question of fact. What happened on what date? Which date did I get to know of the fraud? If it is a question of fact, in 9 out of 10 cases, I am going to have to lead evidence on it. If I have to lead evidence on it, that means that I can't get any injunction till I have gone through an entire trial of that question. So our side contended that when the legislature uses the word jurisdiction, it means to say, does the court have the power to receive this suit or does it not? According to us, limitation did not say the court has no power to entertain a suit or to receive that suit. Limitation only told the court what it had to do to the suit once it was filed. We lost before the High Court. The High Court had a substantial hearing. Every question was gone into before a single judge. When we went before 2 judges, the questions which remained out of, say, 10 questions were only 3. And ultimately, when we came to the Supreme Court, the question was only one. So you see the triangle building. Now, let me then show you a case brief for that sort of a matter. Now, before an appellate court, and especially at the Supreme Court level, in civil cases, there can be very little dispute on what the facts are because the courts below have already gone into those facts. You go to the Supreme Court only if ultimately there is some legal dispute between the parties. So instead of giving that court, and the Supreme Court's own rules require that when you file a, a proceeding in the Supreme Court, you as it is have to give a judge a summary of the case so that the judge who is listening to cases from all across the country does not need to spend too much time. So, you know, when you are preparing your case brief, that the judge already has a bird's eye view of the facts because they are already in the list of dates which is filed with your original petition. That petition also has a synopsis, which is essentially a description of what the dispute is. So when you are preparing your case brief for a hearing in the Supreme Court, you really have to narrow the question down to what is the proposition which you want the court to decide on. So in our case, it so happened that before our matter had come up, our matter came up in uh, about July or August of 2015. Before our matter came up, there were already two other matters which had been decided by the court. One in which the court had said limitation is not an issue of jurisdiction, so in our favor. In another matter, the court said limitation is a question of jurisdiction and that the the prior decision which had said limitation is not was actually wrong. So when we came before the court, our task was to tell the court, you have two views which are diametrically opposite. The question is only one. So you start off by giving broadly, again, same principle. You start chronologically. Para 1 is about the first decision. Para 2 is about the second decision. And then para 6, ignore for a moment what came in the middle, is the central question before the court. Now, these were submissions which we filed before the first hearing of the case. Now let me give you an instance of the kind of submissions you may file in order to argue a case. And I will, just to maintain continuity, give you an example of the same case. Now, there is a little bit of repetition here, but in this note, what we decided was, okay, I was appearing in the case with a senior lawyer. That senior lawyer was about 90 when we argued the case. He's still practicing today. He told me that, look, at my age, I can't stand up for a very long time. And if I have to argue this case, I will have to be standing up for like 2 hours. Let's do one thing. Prepare a note which you, as in me, can read to the bench. And while you are reading, if I have to highlight something, I will simply get up and highlight it. So when you are preparing a case brief in such a situation, you have to go slowly in some detail, but also prepare it as if you are preparing a speech, something to be heard, not to be read. Okay, which means that all your highlighting, writing in bold, etc., that is not now for the court. That is now, this note is really for you. Again, you start chronologically, but you prepare the note in the manner in which you would want the court to approach that problem or that case. The, the fourth type of case, or rather case brief, is what we had discussed, what I had said. There are two kinds of case briefs. There's one which you prepare in order to argue a matter. And then there is one in which you prepare a brief note on a case which is already decided. Now let me give you an instance of that. So I'm sticking to the case, to that case which we argued before the Supreme Court. Our task there, like I told you, there was one decision in January which favored us, one decision in April which went against us. That decision said that the first court was wrong because it had not noticed earlier decisions of the Supreme Court. So it then became important to be able to tell the Supreme Court why that finding, that the court had not noticed those earlier decisions, was wrong. It therefore became critical to be able to tell the Supreme Court what those various decisions were about. Now, like you deal with your facts, it is the same way when you come to deal with judgments. Your first task is to read the judgment inside out at least once. With judgments, I usually prefer that people read them at least 3 or 4 times entirely. Because even more than letters, documents, emails, judgments are an expression of the mind of a judge, of the thoughts of the court. And it's really important for us to be able to decipher exactly what the court said and what motivated the court to say that thing. And that is something which you will learn only when you have become as familiar as you can be with those words. And that can only occur if you have read it enough number of times. So this note, again was just 2 pages, but it was preceded by me having read every case which is referred to here at least about 3 to 4, if not 5 times. It's only then that you realize of a case which is, say, of 20 pages, the really important pages or paragraphs are, say, about 10. Within those 10, the really important sentences are X, Y, Z. And therefore, it's only those which I need to reproduce. So here, I start with the case which, according to us, was wrong. Then we say that it held that this earlier decision was in fact incorrect. And then we try to explain why, what we in legal parlance call distinguish a case. Why were those old cases distinguishable? Now, I have, so this was a brief overview of how I would prepare case briefs when it comes to a general matter in any one given matter. Now, there are two questions here. Alicia asks, can we do the same in domestic violence? Uh, yes, I've never done a domestic violence case, but the principle remains the same. It's the facts and the law, right? Uh, Deepa Punjani asks, are there any good reference books for preparing case briefs? No. Uh, there aren't, and there is a good reason for it. Each case is unique, and each lawyer's understanding or approach to a case is unique. A case brief is really indicative of the lawyer's approach to a case. And there is very little possibility of reducing that to a science. There are no fixed rules in it. So there are no good reference books for preparing case briefs. Frankly, the best book is a book called Experience. A synopsis of a case and a case brief, really not very different. Technically speaking, a synopsis is usually a very, very short statement of the entire case. Okay. To me, a case brief means facts and legal arguments, whereas a synopsis is usually a broad mixture of the two, just to give a judge a broad idea of what the case is about, not to tell him this is the chronology of facts, these are the questions of law. Those are things which you put in a case brief. Prashant Shirsagar asks the effect of repetition. Uh, that's a very good question. Repetition is the bane of our system. If you will see pleadings, as you will experience more, pleadings, affidavits, plaints, etc., often repeat the same thing over and over and over again. It only adds to the length of the case. It does not add to its substance. So one of the primary reasons why you prepare a case brief is to get rid of all the repetition which has happened. Okay. Drishti Jain asks, considering the large amount of reading one has to do, would it be wise to spread reading or using keywords? No, no. See, I'm, like I said, I started with saying, I'm always asked when people see me reading papers in a brief, or, they see these are fat law books. They ask me, do you need to read all of that? No, but you need to read all of it at least once. Because although when you are practicing law, it's not like an exam. You don't need to remember everything. you definitely need to know where you can find the answers to your questions. And that can't come by say doing a command S. That has to come only when you read and understand a decision or a section or a commentary or even facts or letters in their context. And that context can only be got by reading the document itself. With experience, you will start realizing. So, for instance, if it's your first case, reading the brief for the first time may take you 3 hours. But by the time you are on your 15th or 20th case, you will realize that the three has come down to one. And the reason is that because of repetition and because of not repetition so much, but because of experience, you have started understanding what to emphasize on and what you may just glance over. So that each time you do a matter, it's very likely that the time you take to understand the matter comes down. Okay. As a client, Sameer asks, should a client be preparing a brief to tell the lawyer about the facts? Yes, definitely. But that is no replacement for the lawyer actually reading the papers. Okay. Case briefs are prepared when pleadings are all complete, when all the material is in court, and to tell the court, in order to save your time, look at this, and this. When a client comes to a lawyer, that's a very, very different stage. There, it's the client's right and the lawyer's responsibility to actually go through the entire documentation himself or herself. And it's convenient, but it can only take you so far. Alicia says drafting is to put, okay. Alicia, your baseline question is, how do you judge what is an important fact? Like I said, the importance of a fact or the importance of any one aspect of a case is only realized when you have gone over that case repeatedly. Okay. Uh, it's only when you go over your papers 2-3 times that you realize what in these papers is excess, what is important, what is important from the point of view of a lawyer in terms of what are your strong points, what are your weak points, and what is important from the point of view of the judge. For example, when I told you suppression, a judge is looking for something like that because a judge does not have time on his own to read everything. A judge relies on lawyers that they are giving him the complete picture. Okay. Uh, Harpreet asks, are the rules applicable for drafting a case brief different for different courts? Secondly, what is the page limitation? Harpreet, there are no rules, frankly, apart from one provision in the Code of Civil Procedure. Uh, that is Order 18, Rule 2, Subrule 3A. Okay. It says that any party may address oral arguments in a case and shall, before he concludes the oral arguments, submit, if the court so permits, concisely and under distinct headings, written arguments in support of his case. The word written arguments is extremely important. A case may have 5 questions in it. When you argue the case before a judge, you may argue only 2. The judge is not expected to give a decision on all 5. The judge will say, this is what was emphasized to me in court. and I am going to restrict myself to that. That is why the CPC, let me repeat the provisions, Order 18, Rule 2, Subrule 3A. It uses the word written arguments. They are supposed to be a reproduction of exactly what you argued in court. Uh, can a synopsis of filed plaint and a brief be the same? I'm not really understanding the question. Uh, is it, Nidhi asks, is it not mandatory to file the same? No, Nidhi, it's not mandatory to file written submissions. Written or a case brief. A case brief, like I said, is only filed in order to make the judge's life simpler. So it's always preferable because, like I said, the judge on any given day has 100 cases. If he knows that out of 100 cases, cases which Nidhi Bajaj brings to him always have a case brief, he knows that Nidhi Bajaj has made his life simpler for him. That is why you file a case brief. Okay. Uh, Digvijay asks, we have a brief which can take half an hour or an hour to read in front of a judge. Do judge give this much time to a lawyer? And does the judge read through brief for his own understanding? Yes. Like I said, a judge will give you time depending upon what the case is. If the case is a trial, for example, if the case is the final hearing of a suit, the judge has no option but to give you as much time as you need, because that is your first time to present the facts and the law on every aspect of your case. So the judge gives you as much time as you need. As you go higher in the hierarchy of courts, because, like I said, in a trial court, you may have 10 issues. Before the first appeal court, those 10 issues get compressed into what are the 5 or 6 legal, really important legal questions. Then you go before a second appeal or second appellate court, the questions become even more limited, maybe 1 or 2. When you go before the Supreme Court, largely the question is only one. So, and with it, the time which you are given is going to reduce as well. So, with each step up in the chain of litigation, the importance for a case brief goes higher because A, there are far more number of cases, there are far few numbers of judges, therefore time is of the essence, and therefore it's important that you get a judge interested. And a judge, the more the paper, the less interested the judge is. So if your case brief can tell him this is a case which requires me to read about 5 or 10 pages rather than 500, he is going to give you his attention, and he is going to read that case brief as much as as detailed a way as possible. uh, Prabhav asks, is emphasizing on particular facts or law by repetition not okay? Prabhav, repetition is good when it is a part of rhetoric. When you are talking to somebody, you repeat something for emphasis. But when you are preparing a case brief, you are making a written document. Unlike when talking, that written document is always going to be available. So you don't, repetition in a written document is not as important, because once you have a point there, it's going to be there always. It's in written form. So, and a case brief, as the name suggests, or a synopsis, as the name suggests, is an effort to shorten or make brief the matter, right? So the more you repeat something, the longer it's going to get, and the less purpose is going to be served. Uh, can we support our case with Alicia, I didn't understand this question. Uh, in a case brief, like I said, your first task is to get the facts out of the way. When you are describing the facts in a case brief, don't discuss any law, because there you are trying to make the judge emphasize or give his attention just to the facts. The law will come. The law comes in the second part, where after you have narrated all the facts you want to narrate, you then come to bullet point submissions of these facts should lead you to XYZ legal inference. And it is when you are showing that inference that you cite case law. I hope I've answered the questions. Thank you, Plea, for inviting me.